Have you ever wondered why we are the way that we are, why we keep repeating the same mistakes, and why these habitual patterns are so hard to get out of? Vipassana teaches us a lot about this habit patterns. And in this video, we're going to talk about sankharas, we're going to talk about karma or kama, and we're going to talk about equanimity and how the practice of Vipassana helps us deal and really empowers us to face this habit patterns that we do want to change and empowers us to become the people that we want to be. Having completed a 10-day course, Goenka repeats a lot sankharas. This is what you're trying to get out of. So we'll start this video with talking about what sankharas are, and maybe just a different perspective of really understanding what it is. Sankharas are conditioned, habitual, reactive patterns of the mind, right? And Goenka's always talking about a sankhara will arise with this sensation or that sensation. It's planting seeds and doing all of this. I'm going to explain what all of that means and how it's all connected. We start life as a blank canvas. Of course, we have the system, the deep subconscious system, the primal system that is, functioning when we are children. And then, of course, we get to a certain age, toddler, young child, where we start to realize, oh, I have some power. I have an ability to make actions, to make my own intentional actions. And this is where it starts. We begin with first just making an intentional action, right? Something happens, we want something, and we make a response. And eventually what happens is, when we're young, this is new pathways firing in the brain. The next time we do the same action, those pathways are again deepening. And then we do this over and over and over again. And then eventually this response or this intention that started at the conscious level transforms by the process of the neurons firing together and the habit forming, and then it becomes an automatic response, right? This habit pattern of the mind starts to happen faster than you can even consciously process what's happening, right? And this is a great part of the system. This is a great feature to have, to be able to, be able to drive and not really have to focus on every aspect of driving as you did when you first started learning. Right? When you first started, you focused on everything. Everything was intentional. You were paying so much attention. And now it almost feels like you're driving with your eyes closed, right? You're really not even focusing, but somehow you get where you get safely. So this can be a useful tool, this feature of things becoming so habitual that we don't have to really think about it and we don't have to give a lot of computing, a lot of conscious computing to it. But there is a danger. And the danger is, what if this automatic habitual pattern is one that is producing outcomes that we don't like? I love being able to drive and not think about it. And I, haven't killed anyone or crashed or anything. So it's very useful. But then there are other ones, right? Reactive emotions, it's other personality traits that we have accumulated over our lifetime. That's negative, right? You might be trying to be more disciplined. You might be trying to be more healthy. You might be trying to be more creative, right? You have these goals and there's something holding you back. And that thing is your sankharas. How do sankharas work, right? Sankhara is the immediate process that happens when you are making an intentional action. And then it evolves into an automated, speeded up, powerful, habitual pattern of mind. So let's say you're trying to become a less angry person, and anger is your issue, right? It started as when you were, a child, maybe a couple years old or something. You started to have this idea that, oh wow, now I can make an influence in the world. And let's say when you got angry, maybe things went your way, or you felt good expressing that anger and shouting and stuff. And so it started when you were young, as an intentional thing, because it was probably something you didn't do in the womb. You certainly didn't do when you were, less than a year old. It took a while for you to even develop that capacity to be angry. And when that started, it was so new that it was intentional. Like you had to do it. Now, is a 2, 3 year old super intentional? Not in the regard of, oh, are they making adult decisions and stuff? No, but in the regard of as a conscious awareness being, it started as, oh, this is an exploration of doing. And then that anger, right? That response of anger to certain situations not going your way, right? You did it over and over in your early childhood, in your mid, late childhood, early teens, mid teens, late teens. And this response of anger and the way that you handle it and the way that you related to it started as an intentional thing, but then has accumulated over time to again become this automated, super fast, way stronger and way faster than you can even consciously perceive. And then now you are a slave to that, right? This is what you have to undo. This is what you're trying to undo. And so the sankhara will show up, right? When a situation arises to make you angry, because this brain pathways are so strong. It's like a huge highway where the speed is so fast. When a situation arises to cause anger, your anger comes so quick. It comes so quickly and overpowers you. And then you do an action or you shout or you do something that you don't like. And then later on, you're like, man, I really need to work on my anger. I really need to be a better person. I'm, negatively influencing the people that I love or that I care about, or just even if it's to strangers, it's like it's not creating optimal results. And so you have this desire to want to change the anger. And so that is what the sankhara is, right? Is how deep, like what is the pattern? What are the mental pathways that have been used so often, right? There's a thing in neuroscience that says, neurons that fire together, wire together, or something to that effect. And essentially, it's just this process of your brain wants to have this efficiency. So if something happens frequently and a lot, it'll just make that such a fast response. And so when you are working with sankhara, understanding sankhara in terms of Vipassana is what are the neurons that have created, the infrastructure of the way that you handle and respond to life, and that can include your emotional response, your mental response, can include any response that you're having internally, and the conditions, right, and how deep it is determines how strong the habit pattern is. And in the discourses, Goenka talks about, some sankharas, it's like you're drawing a line in the water, it just disappears as soon as you do it. Some is like drawing a line in the sand. It'll be there, overnight, and then by the morning it'll be gone, or the next day it'll be gone. And then some are like you've chiseled into a rock. You've like drawn a line into a rock, and that will not leave for a long time. Eventually it will, but it is. And so how do we understand this from this perspective of our neurons and how the pathways that have been created, these subconscious automated responses of habitual responses that have happened, whether positive or negative? That is what we are trying to change in Vipassana, right? So you have this challenge of, I am a product, I am an outcome of the neurons, and in a less scientific way, of the patterns, of the experiences, of the responses that I have had to situations from the past. And that determines how, if your sankhara in that specific situation, let's say with anger, right? Some people are less angry than others in general. Other people are more angry in general. That determines, right, how deep that line is, that sankhara, how deep the sankhara is. Someone who, just gets a little angry and, is maybe more temperate, more moderate in their anger response, their anger sankhara is not as deep. Sure, it can be as deep. Maybe on the rock, it's chiseled like a few inches in. And then somebody who is hyper angry, always ready to blow up, and just super hyper angry, right? And I'm just exaggerating here to, make a point. their sankhara is like chiseled feet into the rock. And so depending on what the sankhara is, right, what the conditioned response, what the habitual response to the situation is, whether it's restlessness, and you can take any emotion, basically, you can take any response that you don't like, that you're like, oh man, I wish that, I wasn't so dissatisfied, or I wasn't so miserable, or you can take anything, and all of that is the outcome, right, of the depth of the sankhara, of how deeply you have been doing X that produces the result Y. So that is sankharas, right? Is the immediate response that you've had that has accumulated over time to create deep grooves, or you can think of it as maybe brighter neural pathways or deeper neural pathways, however you want to understand it. And this is what you're trying to change. And this is what's keeping you in let's say, the prison of your life. And maybe I don't want to sound too exaggerated, but this is what keeps you stuck, right? This is what keeps you at the level that you are and does not allow you to upgrade to the next level. Where does Vipassana come in? I'll get to that in a little bit, because it's very important to understand why, with Vipassana, as taught by S.N. Goenka, we are working with physical sensations. And once we understand that, I'll go more deeper into how Vipassana helps us, be less reactive to these habitual patterns that are faster than our conscious reactions, right? We're able to process at a much slower rate consciously than our subconscious mind. And so how can you fight it? That is the answer that Vipassana provides. That's the tool that Vipassana is how do you fight this battle where you are outpaced, right? Outstrengthened. Your subconscious is so much stronger, so much faster, so much more, just way more powerful than you. So how do you change this? How do you live within this? How do you make life the way that you want when you have this system that you have to, I don't even want to say fight, but you have to reconfigure it to be the way that you want it to be. And so we'll talk in a bit about how Vipassana does that and why the sensations are important. So back to, it started, reactions or responses started as an intentional conscious process. And then through repetitions, it's become an automated, fast-paced response to situations that might be similar, that might not go the way that you want. And how do we feel these? How do we feel this fast system? How do we feel the influence of our subconscious mind? So for instance, when you're angry, when, let's say a situation arises, something that you don't want to happen happens, and anger starts, then how does the system respond? Like, how do we feel consciously? How do we feel this response of anger that's coming from our subconscious mind and from our bodies and from our minds and from everything? We feel it as a feeling, right? Whether it's the flight or flight response that can feel, like you're just kind of not there. Your awareness kind of goes down, but you're like hyper focused. Maybe you feel a little empty inside. The adrenaline's pumping, maybe your heart rate, you can feel it pumping, right? This is a feeling when this flight or flight response comes. Or let's take, an example of you're feeling unsatisfied with life. You're doing everything externally to, live a successful life, but deep down you're unsatisfied, right? All of these we feel as feelings, right? So the subconscious habitual response patterns that have accumulated, we experience them as feelings, right? We experience them as physical sensations, emotional sensations, and mental sensations. And this is the key to how we can start to understand the system and then ultimately make the system live in alignment with the vision that we have of our conscious life, right? I assume if you're watching this video, you are, wanting to have a more fulfilled life. You want to become a master of your own mind. You want to be very engaged with life. You want to be happy. You want to have a lot of love. You want to be an exuberant person. right? This is people that go on the path of meditating, of spirituality, you know, for the most part, are this kind of certain people that want this bigger version of themselves and this bigger version of life. And so to understand what's keeping you from that, and to understand the way to walk towards that, Vipassana and this idea of working with physical sensations is rooted in this key concept, which is the way that we experience the habitual patterns of our minds, whether it's positive or negative, is through sensations, right? It's a feeling, right? When you're driving and you're not really paying attention, you're feeling the driving. You're not thinking about the driving. You're not focusing with your eyes on the driving. Well, of course you are focusing, right? But the essence is you just feel it. You just feel the driving. And you know, you can be talking to your friend and you can, you know, I wouldn't recommend looking at your phone, but if you needed to, you could do that. And you're in it because you're just feeling the driving, right? Or if you're riding a bicycle, it's like first you had to, you know, be so on it, so focused, and eventually you learn, and now you just feel the riding. So in any flow state you enter, right, it's just, you just feel. You're not thinking, you're not perceiving, you're not doing this, you're just feeling the process and you're doing it. So this is an important thing to keep in mind, because this is how we relate, this is how this deep subconscious system, where the information is stored, where these habitual patterns are being imprinted and where they're being processed and where they're being executed. And then with our conscious experience, this is the bridge. And this is why in Vipassana, I don't remember what discourse it was, what day, but Goenka talked about, you know, the greatest insight of the Buddha, you know, however you say it, was that the missing link in the, you know, chain of cause and effect was sensations, right? That was what the Buddha discovered, because, you know, like Goenka was saying, there was morality being preached. You should do good, you know, try to abstain from evil. Samadhi was being taught at those times, you know, like master your mind, be concentrated, you know, have all these practices. And there were many meditations, many practices. And then there was, you know, the experience of wisdom of, hey, try to gain wisdom in life, try to live your life as a noble, wise person. And so there was all that teaching. And the difference between those meditation techniques and the Buddha's meditation technique was this idea of sensations being the link, being where things start, where the sankharas start, and where they multiply. And so when we understand this important concept, that the way that we connect to our subconscious mind, right? For instance, all these neurons that have been wired and have these highway systems, and it's very easy to travel on them, the way that we experience those and the language that we experience it as is through sensations. And so the way that we need to work with it, the way we need to work with this system, is through physical sensations, or rather through sensations. In Vipassana, we're choosing physical sensations for many primary reasons. The most important being, it is the most objective sensation that we can feel. And what do I mean by that? Let's take an emotion, for example. Let's take a situation. Depending on where you're at in your life, you can feel different things towards the same thing, right? For instance, with my parents. I loved my parents through my childhood. I became a teenager. I was a little more like, I still loved them, but there was a bit more resistance, you know, the usual teenage stuff. And then I became an adult and I love my parents again, right? And so it's like you take this idea, or like the reality of my parents, and dependent on where I was in life, my experience of my parents is different. And so it's not as objective, right? It's very subjective to my situation. And so when you take, let's say, a mental sensation, right? Some people do a mantra practice where they're repeating a word over and over and over again. This, you know, this is a mental sensation that you're being intentional about, that you're generating. And therein lies the issue. It is something that you're generating, right? You have to create the words, you have to create the repetition. And so then this depends on, you know, how strong is your creativity in your mind? What is the strength of your ability to make this sound? And it's dependent upon you because you're creating it. And so that is like super subjective again. What we want to do is we want to work with an objective tool. And the reason why physical sensations and the breath are objective is because it doesn't matter what you're experiencing. The breath and physical sensations will continue to do what they do, regardless of the experience that you're having. So for instance, with the idea of my parents and me growing up and changing my perspective of them and my experience of them, let's replace my parents with, let's say, the breath, right? When I was 1 year old, I was breathing. I didn't feel any kind of way about it. I didn't love my breathing. I didn't hate it. It just was what it was. I was a teenager. I didn't really have any, repulsion or attraction. It was just my breath. And, as I continue to live life, it'll just continue to be my breath. And so it takes out more subjective influences on this object of meditation. And the other key important thing with physical sensations specifically is that they are the closest thing that we can intentionally pay attention to, that the system that we're trying to change, right? The subconscious system, these habitual patterns and the management of the processes, the execution of the processes, it shows up as sensations. And it can speak the language of sensations. And Goenka uses, a really good point on that regard, which is when a mosquito comes on your face and you're fast asleep, your subconscious mind is either blank or dreaming or whatever, your subconscious mind will feel the sensation and will react to it. And you'll wipe it away. And the other important thing about why physical sensations and the breath are really important is because, let's take the mantra, for example. Let's say you're using, the word mantra itself. I'll just keep it simple. And you keep repeating the word mantra in yourself, and this is your practice. You do this 20 minutes in the morning, an hour in the morning, however long you do it for. When a situation arises that, let's say, generates anger within you, you're going to be in a state of anger. Your ability to reason and your ability to think is going to be gone, out the window, far, far away, right? And so to then rely on you doing the intentional, conscious, rational decision of generating a mantra in your mind, you will not want to do that, right? You will laugh at it, or not laugh at it, but you will dismiss it as if you have time to generate a mantra right now. However, let's say, for instance, your tool is you're focusing on your breath for an hour in the morning. The anger comes, you're in a situation, the anger comes, you focus on your breath as you're feeling the anger. So you're not trying to dismiss the anger, you're not trying to go away, because the anger shows up in your breath. But the anger will not show up in your mantra, right? Your mantra will not be sustained anyway, because when you're living life and you're doing life, you cannot simultaneously be chanting a mantra over and over again. And so that's the other thing, is the proximity of physical sensations and the breath to every experience that we have, especially when the stability of our mind is gone, when our rationality is gone, our reasoning is gone, all of this is gone. Then we need something very close, something that takes the least amount of energy to do. And that is a more reliable tool. And what do I mean by least amount of energy, right? You can be angry and focus on your breath. And the action of focusing on your breath does not require too much energy. In comparison to, let's say, for example, you have a mantra practice. When you're in a state of anger, to start to say, to first slow down the thinking process of the whatever is happening, to then start to chant the mantra within your mind, requires you literally slowing down the whole experience, moving your attention from the thing that is, maybe causing you the anger. And again, the situation might not be changing outside, and the thing that is creating this anger, and you can continue to be happening. And so constantly you're trying to not focus on that, and you're trying to wrestle with your conscious experience of what's happening, and you're trying to make it come this way to say, okay, no, I want to do this mantra. I'm going to keep repeating this word in my mind. Now, if you're not in the active situation, this could be helpful. But if you're in the active situation, it's very hard to focus on what's at hand and try to wrestle your mind to not pay attention to this and to start repeating this thing in your mind, because it takes a lot of conscious processing to chant a mantra, which is one of the reasons why it's very easy to become very focused when you're doing a mantra, right? You can go 30 minutes and not have a single thought, and you can repeat that in every mantra session, because you can just make the sound louder and louder in your head if you're like a thought comes. But with Vipassana, right, it's much harder to have an hour of uninterrupted focus. And so one of the reasons is because your conscious mind, right, has a certain bandwidth. Your subconscious has a much bigger bandwidth, but your conscious mind has a much bigger bandwidth. And in order to do a mantra, it takes up most of that bandwidth. To focus on the breath does not take up a lot of that bandwidth. And this is one of the key factors, is because when you're in this state where, let's say, anger has taken up all the bandwidth, and you only need 1% of this bandwidth in order to focus on the breath, you can do that in that situation where the anger is you're actively in the situation that's generating the anger. However, creating the mantra in your head takes up a lot more bandwidth. And so because it takes up a lot more bandwidth, it's much harder to do when you're in the active process of the situation that is giving you the anger. And this is why Vipassana is so important, is because it's trying to give you the tools that you can use immediately, use in all the situations. You're listening to the language, and you're using the language of your subconscious mind that it can also understand. And that's the other thing. With a mantra, your subconscious mind, the way that it relates to ideas and words in your head, is it goes through a different process than the feeling of a sensation in your physical body. The feeling of the sensation in your physical body is a much faster process, and your subconscious mind doesn't have to do a lot of interpretation, right? For instance, in your conscious mind, you might be thinking about, a spider, right? You see a spider and you generate all this fear. Your subconscious doesn't really understand the object of the spider that your conscious mind is focused on, but it will react to the fear that you feel, and it will use that as the impulse, and that's what it will interpret, right? Because in the real world, you can most likely crush the spider, and literally you are 1,000 times bigger than it. Most of the time, as long as it's not poisonous or anything, or even if they are, if you know how to handle them, you can kill them. Right? You have almost absolute power over it, especially if you use your reasoning, even if they are a dangerous species. And that's the reality of the situation. But when you have your subconscious thought about it, you might not be thinking in that way. And so your subconscious mind will interpret all this subjective experiences around this thought of the spider. Whereas with a physical sensation, right? If there is, a touch on my wrist, my subconscious mind does not need to incorporate too much subjective data into what it is processing, right? There's less data, there's less information baked into physical sensations. And that's the other reason why we use sensations, is because the pathway to connect to the subjective, or rather to the deep subconscious mind, the pathway from physical sensations is much cleaner, much smoother, much shorter, and much more connected than, let's say, the pathway of if we decided to use like a meditation object of, staring at a light or doing a mantra or any of these kinds of stuff. And this is personally why I love Vipassana and why I have been doing it for so many years and will continue to do it for the rest of my life, is because it makes so much sense. And this is where the teaching of Vipassana comes in, and the qualities that we are developing in Vipassana can really start to unlock and change who we are, so that we can live and become this person that we want to be, and be the person that we hope the practice is going to make us be. And so this is how it works. And for a quick recap, I know we did a whole big chunk of explanation. We have the sankharas, which are intentional actions that have evolved to become habitual automated responses from the subconscious system. And, again, taking into fact that when we were making these decisions and making these habits, we weren't as wise as we are today. We didn't know all that we knew today. If I could go back and tell my young self, hey, don't do this, don't think this way, create these habits, do all of this work, obviously that would put me in a much better position. But we have to accept the fact that the young us, the dumb us, the more ignorant us has created these habit patterns that are now mainly serving us, sometimes serving us, and also sometimes disservicing us, or most of the time not serving us. And this is what we're trying to change. And Vipassana accomplishes this again, because this deep habitual pattern we experience as sensations. This is where the physical practice of focusing on your physical sensations, on a few inches area and moving, being aware of the very subtle sensations and remaining equanimous with them really come in. Because if we break it down, how we experience these conditioned habitual responses, again, like I said, is the feeling. And when we are in that feeling, we can continue to exasperate the sankhara. We can continue to empower the habitual pattern in what we do now and make it stronger when it comes back. Make the pathways deeper when it comes back and makes it easier to go through those pathways again. Or we can let this habitual pattern happen, and then we can try to put a stop to it. And how do we put a stop to it? Putting a stop to it does not mean not feeling the feeling, right? It doesn't mean you're angry and you're just telling yourself, I'm not angry. Think of calm thoughts or imagine the beach, or you're not running away from the anger, right? First of all, you got to feel it. You have to embrace the anger, right? You have to be mindful of the anger. And generally what happens is you have two options from here. You can either fuel this by continuing to react with ignorance. That's meaning, like, have you ever been in like a crowd and people are like egging on a situation that has grown tense? Maybe they start shouting, fight, 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 or something like this. And they are contributing to increasing the tension and like increasing the power of what's happening. And so you can either be doing that, like saying fight, fight, fight to your anger, or you could just observe, right? If two people started fighting in a crowd and people weren't egging it on and they were just kind of, looking at it, but not like too invested, the energy certainly, or the tension certainly wouldn't rise as much as when people are like, fight, fight, and like that crowd mentality starts. So you're essentially trying to stop that effect from happening when you're feeling the thing. So how does that feel like when you're in the process of having anger, and how do we counter it? So the way that we counter it is we try to remain equanimous, right? Like, again, like in the crowd, if you see a fighting, you're not contributing to it, you're not getting riled up, and you're not putting more intention into it. What that looks like is observing it with equanimity. And how does that disempower? It disempowers the anger and the habitual patterns, because your subconscious mind, right, what it is experiencing is it's taking signals from you, right? It's taking signals from you to reinforce what it's doing. For example, earlier I talked about a spider. There, you think about a spider, it might be there, it might not even be there. And when this image of a spider comes up and you generate this fear, if you egg that fear on and you're in your head thinking about the spider, oh, so horrible, I'm going to die, it's going to kill me, it's going to get me, it's going to crawl in my ears, it's going to go in my mouth, and you're egging the fear on and you're like rising the energy of the fear, your subconscious mind, right, is getting the signal. Okay, when this object of a spider arises in the either eye sensation, eye consciousness when you see a spider, or in the mental image, right, you can just imagine a spider, it will say, okay, I have gotten the signal from the master that this response is necessary and is encouraged, because clearly he's egging it on and he is saying, hey, we need to have this response. And so your subconscious mind takes your signals from you and gives you and says your response is right. And so when you respond with egging it on, it keeps empowering it. What happens when you do that? When you bring in equanimity. So let's say the spider comes up, fear comes up. Now, again, it's okay to feel the fear. This is not, equanimity is not about not feeling fear. You feel the fear and then you use your wisdom, right? The fear comes up. You're like, well, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of spiders. That's me. Or, then when the thought of, oh, it can kill me comes, when you remain equanimous, you can be like, well, how would it kill me? This one's not poisonous. It might be poisonous. It's not poisonous. And you start to bring this rationality to it. And how you do that, again, is you first have to stop emotionally responding. And that's what equanimity helps with, is how to stop the emotional reaction to the emotion, right? So you've got the anger. Equanimity makes your emotional response less, which allows your rational response to start to come in a little more. And then in this process of like being with this fear of the spider and you're being equanimous, you're bringing a little more rationality into it because you're not egging on the fear, you're not heightening the fear, then your subconscious mind is getting these signals of, oh, maybe it's not as dangerous as we think it is, right? And then what happens again? The fear comes up, right? You go through life and then somehow you either see a spider or you think about a spider and then it comes up. Then again, you have the same response. You don't egg on the fear. You don't exaggerate it. You don't blow it up. You remain calm. You feel the fear. That's totally fine. Again, your subconscious mind is getting the signal. Oh, hey, I guess we don't need to react that much. So again, like this, you keep doing this. And now you're creating a new intentional habit pattern of a response to the fear, to the spider. And like this, right? You got to do this. And this is a long process by any means. It does not mean, this will happen after a 10-day course and you will no longer have fear of spiders or anything. It's possible. I hope it's possible for you if you're very afraid of spiders. I'm also afraid of spiders still. But anyway, to just get the concept is by creating this equanimity, by feeling the sensations, and again, being able to feel physical sensations and that being the main focus of our meditation, allows us to, when the anger comes, we have more perceptions and more abilities to perceive sensations and how they show up in our bodies and how they show up in our minds, because we're constantly exploring the mental, physical phenomena through observing the sensations on the physical body, moving our awareness, which is our mind, and moving it in a systematic way. So we're getting this hands-on experience of how to feel emotions, getting the expanse of our mind, getting the expanse of our awareness through our body. And so when the feeling comes, we're able to see, let's say, go back to that fear, we're able to see how that fear shows up, not just in the mental world, but now in the physical world, or rather not the physical world, but like our physical body. And being able to perceive this fear both in our minds, which is, the default is we feel all the emotions in our mind. But now as Vipassana meditators, we're also feeling it in our bodies. And because of this, our lens is widened. We're able to see the truth a little easier. And then when we are responding with equanimity to this fear, we're not egging the situation on. We're creating a new response to this stimulus. And then our subconscious mind is picking up on this process and being like, all right, so he's not overreacting. That means this isn't a dangerous situation. The spider isn't that dangerous, so we can chill out with our huge thing. And then like this, slowly, you start to create new habit patterns, and you start to come out of your old habit patterns that were keeping you stuck in your life and that were making you be the person that you so badly want to evolve from. And not that you hate yourself or that I hate myself, but more so, there is wisdom to be had. There is mastery over mind to be had. There is so much to be explored in this lifetime. And we have to go as far as we can before we go to where we have to go. And so this inspiration really fuels this process of Vipassana. So that's how Vipassana helps us to reshape these habitual patterns of the mind, to start to speak this language and be able to implement the changes necessary to start to come out of our sankharas. And I want to cover one more thing in this video. I know it's already pretty long. I think this might be the longest video I've done yet, but very important. And it is the idea that, Goenka was always talking about your sankharas. You're planting a seed, and then the fruit ripens and you will get the same fruit of the seed that you planted. And so I want to explore this topic a little deeper, because in the first place, yes, it does apply to sankharas in the sense that because you planted seeds of, let's say, responding with fear to the spider, every time you thought about a spider in the past, and now when the idea of a spider comes into your head, or you see a spider, then the fruit of the sankhara that you've planted over and over again, right, comes back stronger and stronger, right? The more you respond to it in fear, the stronger this fear gets. And so you're just multiplying your fear of the spider when you react to it in the same way. So on one level, this is what it means, is you're planting the seed of this reaction, and you're making this reaction stronger and stronger and stronger. And every time you're doing it, you're multiplying how strongly it comes back in the future. That's one idea. And then the other idea, right, is this idea of karma. People have this misconception that karma is maybe some universal luck, or that's just his karma or something, and instant karma, right? I watched some YouTube videos where somebody like hits like somebody's jaywalking, somebody cuts them off, and then like the cop comes and pulls them over, something like that, right? And then they call it instant karma. And while that is, on some level very humorous to watch and a nice idea, how does it actually show up in Vipassana? Like how does sankharas and equanimity and the practice and the karma, how is this all connected? So karma, the way that I understand it, and again, I'm just sharing my own wisdom so far. I might evolve this wisdom, and I might, have different ideas of what is later on, but so far I'm just sharing my wisdom in the hopes that it's helping you. And if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. If you wouldn't mind leaving a like and subscribing down below. I can't believe I'm doing this as a YouTuber, but anyway, I would really appreciate it. So karma, the way that I understand it, is karma is the fruit of our sankharas. So let's say, again, let's go back to the anger. You've had this response, the sankhara of anger, and depending on what kind of person you are and how deep your sankhara of anger is, everybody's different in that sense. But let's assume that you're a super angry person, and your sankhara of the anger response is so deep, it happens so fast and so strong, and it's very hard to change. How does that show up in your life? This anger, if you're an angry person, you might most likely, I don't even want to say might, you most likely have very strained relationships. You have a hard time building, growing, and maintaining friendships, partnerships, maybe even workplaces. Maybe your career suffers a little more. Your physical health and your mental health definitely are experiencing all the chemicals that come with the anger. All your organs are pretty messed up from this sankhara. And when you look at it and say, well, imagine you're in this person's shoes, and you say, Why do I have such a hard time having relationships? I feel like I don't have meaningful relationships. It's hard for me to keep a job. I am struggling so much. When this idea of karma comes in and this concept of, oh, this is my karma, it isn't a sense of like some universal decider somewhere decided there has to be a certain balance of things and oh, you did one negative thing here and so we got to balance it out by putting negative into your life and stuff. That's not what it's about, right? Karma is the law of cause and effect. And so what happened was you, with the relationships, for instance, you've had this sankhara, this deep sankhara of anger that keeps coming up, and you're in the situation with these people, and your anger, obviously you're not angry 24/7, but however much, once a day, once a week, however much it is, comes up, creates tension between you and the person. Person feels some kind of way, sometimes gets over it. And then if the occurrence of anger of you reacting this way is either for too long or too frequent, or maybe to situations that don't warrant it, right? There's a lot of factors that go into it, right? The other person starts to be like, oh, wow, this guy's like really disturbing my life and is like bringing my life down. And so they will go away. And so this isn't the universe saying, well, don't deserve this because in 10 lifetimes ago, you did X, Y, and Z. And so now this is coming as this. But really what it is you have the kind of person you are, the kind of habitual patterns and sankharas that you've had have led you to create that tension in your relationship because of how you've been responding and living. And so the result is, right, the fruit of your sankhara is that you have strained relationships, can't keep a job, you're finding difficulty, your health is declining. These outcomes and these circumstances of your life, right, are the product of your intentional response, unintentional response, once it's become habitual patterns. And we all have these highways, these neuronal highways. I don't even know if that's a word. And so your karma is the consequence of your actions, is the consequence of your sankharas, of your reactivities and your responses and your experiences that you've had that have created the circumstances that you find yourself in, right? So it's all about what is the fruit of the seeds that you planted, right? What is the outcome of the results? Or no, what is the outcome of the inputs? And so understanding karma in that sense of it's not some universal person or the universe is like keeping track. It's really what kind of life have you been living and what has it produced? What circumstances has it produced? And so the way that you think about, living out your karma, if your anger, right? Let's go back to that angry person. If you start to work on your anger, you start meditating, you start doing other techniques to start fixing your anger issues and you become a more balanced person, what's happening is, like let's say you started here with your anger level. As long as you're here, the outcome will still be the same. And now let's say it takes, let's say this is a normal level of anger. Again, I don't like using that term of a normal level, but let's say a level where people find it acceptable. They'll have a relationship with you, like everybody gets angry here and there. And so let's take that as the baseline. And let's say you're here. So you are incorporating techniques, you're looking after yourself, and you've started to decrease how intense and how much anger that you have. And let's say from here to here, maybe it's a lifetime journey. Let's say it takes 10 years, just as an example, because it is very hard to change. I'll be honest. I don't think somebody will be like, well, I want to solve my anger and they're going to do it in a day. And so let's say this takes 10 years. As you are doing the right thing, as you're practicing, as you're getting the skills, getting the patience, getting the calm, doing all your techniques and all this good stuff, as you're coming down to here, you will still have the effects of having, if you went from a 10 anger to a 9, there's still people that will not have relations with you, that will, like distance themselves from you, and you will still be suffering. Even though you're doing all this hard work, you will still be suffering your past karma or your past sankharas, your past seeds that you've planted. And so for 10 years, you might be serving your time. You might get to a 7 and still people are like, well, this isn't an acceptable level still. You're still going to have a hard time building relationships. You can notice the improvements. You can say, I'm a whole lot better, and all of this stuff, but you're still going to be suffering your karma. And then eventually, right? Eventually, let's say after 10 years, bam, you come back to a normal place. And now you've like served your karma and your debt has been paid, let's say. And what this means is now at this point, and again, it's not that you got here and instantly the next day, now you have great relationships and all this kind of stuff. It might even take more years, because it does take years to like build a satisfying relationship, to really go deep with people. And so it's like 10 years to get here, and then maybe even 10 years to start to create the environment where you do have those deep relationships. So all in all, it could take 20 years. And again, I'm just using random numbers here, but just to explain this concept. And so for these 20 years, you're serving your time. And so when you're having, how should you relate to this, right? Should you give up? You got from a 10 to a 9, you put in so much hard work. Should you say, well, I tried so hard, this isn't for me, this isn't working? No, right? You just keep your head down. You tell yourself you're still serving your time. You still have some karmic debt to pay off. And then once you pay off, then you can be free from it. And this is what the whole Vipassana path is about, right? We have all this debt, right? We have all this habitual patterns that we've accumulated, and they've resulted in these fruits, these fruits that have created the consequences in our lives, the consequences inside of ourselves, whether that comes to internal happiness and fulfillment and joy, or external impact and all this kind of stuff. In order to work on every single one, right? I just used anger as an example, but you can add to that mix, dissatisfaction with life, feeling lost, not having relations because of X, Y, and Z, or whatever problems you might be thinking about that you could be experiencing, and all the multitudes of qualities and characteristics that a human being can have, right? Whether it's patience, whether it's strength of will, whether it's discipline, whatever it might be, right? You put all the qualities and characteristics, right next to each other, and maybe they're all at a 10 in the sense of like, these are holding you back. And so each one, piece by piece, you have to serve your time. You have to be on the path where you are doing something against it. And that's what Vipassana is all about, right? You're reconditioning your conditioned subconscious mind. You're reconditioning your reactive response to situations and to activities. You're doing all this hard work to try to change this conditioning, this deep conditioned behavior pattern of the mind, to bring all these qualities more to an acceptable level, an optimal level, more wisdom, more happiness. How long does this take? Who knows? You'll be doing it your whole life. There will never be a moment where it's like, I have reached peak optimum humanness. And so understanding that this is how Vipassana works, this is how Sankharas, excuse me, understanding this is how Vipassana works, this is what it's doing, this is Sankharas, this is karma, this is the battle I'm up against, this is the purification of the mind that I am doing, this is how I am becoming the highest version of myself, how I'm letting go of the shackles that are holding me down and weighing me down, and how I'm achieving my ultimate purpose, or my highest aim of becoming a self-actualized, self-realized, wise, loving person. Thank you so much for watching. Check out this video. Take care.